In a previous video, I made the following statement. You know, at least they're using actual muskets, which can't always be said for some programs, you blasted pitiful excuse of which, understandably, has led to a few questions and some confusion. You know, it's, almost like I specifically left that comment vague as if to bait people, but surely I wouldn't do something like that, would I? Well, yes, actually I would. That was absolutely comment bait. So let's get started. So a number of people mentioned in that original video that, well, no, indeed, they're not using muskets in Sharpe, but the Baker rifle, and, well, that's quite accurate. It's not a mistake or farbism at all. And indeed, that is the case, that the titular character and his little band of men are using appropriate weaponry for the unit which they are attempting to portray. But that's not exactly what I was referring to. Indeed, this exact complaint of mine isn't really with the Sharpe series on the whole, but more with a very particular scene. Now, you may recognize this scene from my video on how men would never spit-load their pieces, and indeed, this is when making that video, that this problem first came to my attention. The men of this regiment are not using muskets. They're not even using weapons from the 19th century, let alone the Napoleonic Wars. And, well, I should add a minor qualification to that, because some men are indeed using muskets. You know, look at this screenshot here, for example. These men are holding proper weapons. And this one here, again, we see flintlocks being used, as they should, and while they may be being used improperly, you know, their footing is wrong and they're holding it in improper fashion, but that's kind of the point. Because within the context of this television show, this regiment in particular is quite poorly trained, and that's why good old Richard Sharpe is coming in to square them up with his, well, dangerous and inefficient new loading techniques, but that's beside the point. But let's come back to this shot right here. If we carry this scene on, we can see muskets, 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 Now wait a second. Wait now. That doesn't look anything like those first few weapons now, does it? And nor do any of the other weapons after those first three have been shown. And indeed, this is because while those first few musketmen are carrying, well, muskets, no one else in this company is. Now, I will admit that for the most part, this scene was handled quite well, actually, at least as far as these weapon shortages are concerned. The rest of it's a complete mess, but, you know, the weapon shortages they handled quite well. You look at the angles and the perspectives in most of these scenes, and it gives an appearance that every man is indeed holding a musket, and that's absolutely fine. If you can't afford to give every single extra actor a brown vest, then give the bestes to the ones in the main camera shot and use fancy television magic to make it seem like they all have the proper kit. I understand that. Indeed, that's exactly what I proposed in my video on the Black Sails scene that they should do when it comes to the doglock mechanism. You know, that because they're not very common, you can give everyone the brown vest, but give one or two guys the authentic ones just so we can see what they look like and how they work. And indeed, Sharpe would have gotten away with this sort of blatant farbery if not for this one rather unfortunate shot. And so I figured, you know, what better way to milk this sudden wave of subscribers and viewers, which really is quite miraculous in the end, than to pick at a very popular, though also terribly inaccurate, television show. I can smell the controversy already. So let's look at these non-muskets a bit more directly, starting from the very top. You can see that the brass, casing, I suppose, for lack of a better term, that is meant to keep the ramrod, of course, in place against the musket and, you know, ready to hand, as it were, is a bit strange in its pattern. I'm not entirely sure if this sort of casing belongs to any other sort of musket from this time period, but it certainly is not the sort of casing that a brown bess would have. Indeed, it seems very large, clunky, and overall obtrusive when compared to the much more sleek design of the brown bess. And you can see as we go further down these non-muskets that they have very clear bands wrapping around both the stock and the barrel of the weapon. Now, there are plenty of examples, I grant you, of muskets with this sort of banding to keep the barrel attached to the wooden stock, but this is not how the Brown Bess was designed. Instead, the Bess used a system of pins in the stock to keep the barrel in place, as you can see here, and indeed they can be quite a pain because in order to remove the barrel for a fuller, more proper cleaning, you have to actually push these individual pins out and hope that you don't lose them, of course, in the process. You can also see on a few of these weapons a vastly different color scheme to what we might expect, with one rifle, because that's what it is, spoiler alert, it's a rifle, having a very dark, almost sort of mahogany type color, and there's another one there that's sort of speckled and spotted, as if it's made of birch wood or some such, rather than the traditional materials. Now, while we do see some variation over the years in the darkness and shade of the Brown Bess coloring, for the majority of the weapons, you can see here, they generally have a much lighter hue, and indeed in the scene, the actual muskets do have a much lighter color to the non-muskets. Alright, now it's time we got to the really fun bit. If you look closely, you can see a few other details present on these weapons which rather clearly mark them out to be, well, not muskets. Now first, note the groove that many of them have in their stocks, which if you look just above the lock, you can see a sort of shallow indentation of sorts. That sort of thing wouldn't be present on any weapon for quite some time, and it is certainly out of place on the Brown Bess, which you can see here has quite actually a very smooth appearance overall. Even worse, look just below that little groove. Now, you may not be able to make it out precisely because of the low quality of this, very much zoomed in image, but one thing at least is painfully obvious from what we can see. That's not a flintlock. Indeed, it's not a lock at all. So, what is this strange-looking strip of metal which we can barely make out? Well, let's zoom out a bit, and I'll see if I can't find a good comparison image. Let's see here. Yes, here we are. The Mosin Nagant 1891-30. You might recognize it from a few of my other videos, from my Soviet World War II impression. It also seems to be what these Napoleonic infantrymen are carrying, just thinly veiled as Brown Bess muskets. Indeed, that little strip of metal is not a lock. It's a bolt action. And it's no wonder that these men were having so much trouble loading their weapons. Until the next time, my dear viewer, I am, and I shall remain, your most humble and obedient of servants.